Taliban videos of roadside bomb attacks on coalition vehicles in Afghanistan, broadcast on an Al-Qaeda network.
You don't know whether you're coming back with like one leg, no legs, if you're coming back fine or not.
You never know where they are. At least I didn't on a personal level. I would say most of my Marines can agree to that.
This ran to the IED right here.
That's to the power
and
source.
These two ran to the power source.
The more simplistic they are, the more difficult it is to defeat. And that is the beauty of the Taliban's IED.
Slow down, slow down. Jesus Christ.
60% of all our casualties in Afghanistan come from these IEDs.
You can't defeat the IEDs.
Kandahar province in Afghanistan earlier this year. A US medical team is rushing a casualty to hospital. He stepped on an improvised explosive device, or IED.
I could see my left arm was in shreds, and I couldn't feel my feet and my legs. I remember shouting out at the top of my voice that I wasn't going to die in Afghanistan, but I was pretty sure that at that point I probably was going to.
The man is Giles Dooley, a British photographer embedded with US paratroopers.
The medevac crew were fantastic. They picked me up, and then when they left, they flew especially low and fast to try and get me back to Kandahar at the fastest possible time.
Giles survived. Today, after over 20 operations, he hopes to go back to Afghanistan to photograph the human cost of the war.
I personally have never seen myself as a victim. I was out there doing my work. It was a risky job, and I got hurt doing it.
All right, buddy, hang in. They're going to get you there. They're going to put you to sleep and take you to surgery, all right? You're going to be all right, all right?
Others have not survived. This is Kabul, Afghanistan's capital city. Despite increasingly frequent Taliban attacks, most people here, most days, get on with their daily lives. Out in the countryside, it's a different story. This month, the war is 10 years old. The Taliban have laid over 37,000 IEDs, which have killed over 1,100 coalition troops, including 195 British and 718 American soldiers.
The IED is incredibly effective because it's $5 and a little bit of training, and they can be made in some compound in Helmand where they can turn out, 15 in an hour if they've got enough people working. And then this $5 device, if it goes off, can destroy a vehicle worth over £1 million. It can take off a soldier's both his legs if he's lucky enough to survive.
In 2006, the 3rd Parachute Regiment and support troops were posted to Helmand province. Stuart Tootle was in command.
We were initially tasked with conducting a peace support operation. Unfortunately, within weeks of arriving there, we found ourselves actually involved in a fairly vicious counterinsurgency in directly fighting with the Taliban.
That was unexpected. So too were the Taliban's IEDs. On August 1st, 2006, a Spartan armoured vehicle from the Household Cavalry was travelling along a road in rural Helmand province. It's about to be hit by a roadside bomb. and a rocket-propelled grenade. Stuart Tootle organised the rescue.
We immediately flew out to recover the people who had been killed in the ambush. The damage was very substantial. The Spartan vehicle had been completely destroyed and had caught fire. There were a number of soldiers inside the vehicle from the squadron. They would have died absolutely instantly. I have no doubt about that, because the explosions were so large.
Those who died were Captain Alex Ida, Second Lieutenant Ralph Johnson and Lance Corporal Ross Nichols. The driver, Lance Corporal Martin Compton, alone survived. Today he's married and getting on with his life. This was the first IED attack involving casualties on British forces. Over the next year and a half, almost twice as many coalition troops were killed by IEDs than in the previous 5 years of the war. Thousands were wounded. The Taliban's IEDs had changed the entire character of the war. Trevor Colt had fought in Helmand in 2006 and was back there again in 2008. He's still in active service.
The impact was unbelievable. That destroyed morale. You try and stay off the roads, you try and stay off tracks, you try and stay off anywhere which has a track where you may need to go down. Guys like to be able to exchange rounds with the enemy and move to a safe location in cover. But it got to the stage where the safe location in cover was now where there was going to be an IED.
It changes your relationship with the ground, which you've been taught as an infantryman, you've been taught to love, and suddenly you have to fear it.
Patrick Burry was a platoon commander in Trevor's unit.
It also slowers your momentum, because you're suddenly shuffling along alleyways, moving at about, up to 200 meters an hour at max. You're constantly cautious, and you don't know whether the person who's the farmer in the field is going to trigger an IED, or if he's overwatching an IED, or if it's a kid overwatching an IED. And why aren't they telling you if the IEDs are there? So it also separates you from the people too.
It's hard to find them as well, because they can go out and they can dig a massive hole and fill it full of explosives, put soil on it, wet it. Within about 3 hours in that heat, it's dry. You can't even tell the hole's been dug. So it's quite hard to find them as well.
On September the 4th, 2008, Trevor Colt, as platoon sergeant, was at the rear of his column while on patrol.
As we were pushing forward, I seen a black puff of smoke, maybe about 60 metres into the patrol. I seen it and I just thought, it's a bit close. And then I heard the screaming down the net on the radio and my earpiece. I ran to the front of the patrol and it was just chaos. I looked down and I seen my interpreter lying there. I could see he had no fingers, he had no nose, but he was screaming. I looked over and I seen one of my guys lying there. There was nothing from him. Obviously the guy passed away straight away.
Elsewhere in Helmand, US Marines were also coming to terms with the Taliban's IEDs.
While we were operating out there, you're watching your every step, you're trying your absolute hardest to not become complacent. Because when you become complacent, then you're thinking, oh, today's just going to be like yesterday. Today's going to be an easy day, no problem, no one's going to get hurt. And then before you know it, boom.
Get down.
On July 21st of 2008, 27 Fox Company, my group, we set up for an ambush on the Taliban, and it turned out successful in the beginning, and then it kind of unfolded to where one of our Marines was wounded quite severely. We had enemy fire coming from several directions. There was air support, I believe, from either the Air Force or Marines that were dropping 500-pound bombs on certain areas. They would tell us to get down because we're going to feel that shock wave from the bomb.
As a platoon medic, it was Anthony's job to get to the wounded Marine.
My platoon sergeant told me to run, and watch your feet, watch your feet. And about, 10 seconds later, I just remember hearing in my opinion, in my ears, the loudest explosion I've ever heard. And the reason why it was so loud is because it was right under my feet. I kind of got flipped sideways a little bit, and then I landed on my back. And when the dirt cleared, my buddies were working on me. I woke up to a surgical team above me. At that time is when they said, "Do you know what happened?" And I looked down and I saw my stump wrapped in gauze. And I said, yes, I was involved in an IED blast.
Anthony lost his foot. By now, it was clear that the coalition was inadequately prepared to deal with IEDs. And for every technique the coalition came up with to detect IEDs, the Taliban seems to have made a different type of IED to get around it.
You had your radio-controlled IEDs, which are set off by a key fob or a mobile phone or something like that. And then we had the command wire IEDs, which are basically laid and then set to a battery using an electrical wire, and then someone fires it off. And we also had victim-operated IEDs, which is when you step on it, or it's got a tilt switch, so if your metal detector is going over it. And then you could have a mixture of these, which is all designed to sort of negate your electronic equipment, or to get away from your own drills, because they're watching you and seeing how you react to one device, and then they go, okay, they're not doing this, let's do this here. It's a constant battle of wits, really.
And coalition troops were at a disadvantage.
They were teaching, I believe it was from the UK, there was a new development of how to, you basically put your foot and you lay down in front of where you suspect there is an IED, and you start slowly doing this with the dirt, and you start kind of brushing that area away with your hands, with gloves or your bare hands, and you try to slowly get to it. We only used it a couple of times, and one of the couple of times one of our Marines was wounded by an IED by doing that method. So I don't think it's very effective. I didn't necessarily, we all thought it was crazy. Who wants to put their face right next to an IED and scrape dirt like this? I mean, you can only imagine what can occur.
Colin King knows as much as anyone about IEDs. A former arms disposal officer, he led the first British team to train the Afghan army in how to deal with roadside bombs.
The natural tendency with insurgencies is for them to go more and more high technology. That hasn't happened so much in Afghanistan. They use what they know works, but that doesn't mean they don't adapt. So they will try things against security forces, they'll watch what the security forces do, what countermeasures are used, and they can change very, very easily.
Critical to both the Taliban and the coalition trying to defeat them is what the IEDs are made of.
They will have a battery or a power source that's got a high metal content, and then the wiring and the switch itself will often be metallic as well. But all these things can be detected by metal detectors. So one of the things that they'll try and do is reduce that metal content by making the components metal-free.
One of the easiest ways the Taliban reduce the metal in IEDs is by making the switches out of two pieces of hacksaw blade.
So you have your two metal conductors. Wires are attached to that. There's a piece of foam rubber. It's cut to form an insulator between the two and to provide a cushion. And then basically what you have is a simple switch. If a soldier treads on this, he makes the contact between the two, and the current is carried down the wires to the device to detonate it.
The Taliban reduced the metal in the switch even further by using just two strands of copper wire.
This then becomes the conductor that's wrapped around the wooden block You have these pads at the ends. The two blocks are put together. That now becomes a pressure plate with very low metal content. So what you have is a device that can't easily be detected using the current metal detectors.
Afghanis sympathetic to the Taliban demonstrate what's involved in making IEDs in Helmand province this summer. To the best of our knowledge, what they describe are basic aspects of making roadside bombs.
This set of batteries, we prepare for these mines, so these mines explode with the help of these batteries. The enemy's tanks or vehicles get destroyed when they get to them. And this is very powerful. Without these batteries, this is useless. The materials get here from Pakistan. Thank God we have friends. They bring and send us stuff. In the bazaars you can find stuff, but most of the materials come from Pakistan. This is a weapon that can be made in everyone's home and areas the infidels can be confronted with. This is a very good weapon, and the infidels will lose because of such weapons. They cannot deal with us. If they do, they will be spending millions of dollars.
In Part 2, the American-led $60 billion crash program to defeat a device that costs just a few dollars to make in an Afghan village workshop. Confronted by rising casualties from IED attacks, the United States government has responded with a massive program of IED countermeasures. The cost? At least $60 billion so far, and rising, spent on attack helicopters and unmanned aircraft.
God bless America!
Armored personnel carriers and jamming devices to disrupt remotely controlled IEDs. The Pentagon has even signed a contract for blast protective underwear. But why is it costing so much?
The enemy's very adaptive, and this device is very simple, and he can change his attack methodologies pretty easily. To be able to develop a countermeasure and get it produced in the quantities to protect 170 or 200,000 soldiers is no small feat.
Michael Oates was director of the Pentagon's Special Joint IED Defeat Organization, or JIDO.
The organization receives tremendous support from the highest leadership levels in the United States military. Additionally, it's very well funded by the Congress of the United States, a little over $3 billion a year, and not many controls on how the director uses that if he is seeking to find ways to protect soldiers or defeat these devices.
In practice, this means the Pentagon asks defense contractors to compete for contracts to build, for example, jamming devices to disrupt the signals that trigger remotely controlled IEDs. Laurie Buckholt was head of U.S. Army Electronic Warfare for 4 years.
Say, hey, here's a contract. I want you guys to go out and build jammers, design and build jammers. 8 guys are going to come in and say, we can do it, we can do it, we can do it, we can do it. It's against the law to just choose one. So you have to say, okay, who can do it the best? So you wage a competition. Competitions don't happen overnight. You've got to give them a few months to build a prototype. Then you have to go out on the ranges and test that prototype against all sorts of other capabilities. Can that prototype stop IEDs? Can it stop them in ditches? Can it stop them in the air? Can it stop them behind a dead dog? Can it stop it behind a tree? You know, what frequency is it on? Will it jam your GPS, or will it jam that helicopter's GPS? Then that's a no-go. And these tests take a long time. So just the way that the acquisition system runs, because everyone's competing to provide the government a product, makes it timely and expensive.
And yet at the same time, the Taliban have also been busy devising new ways to trigger their IEDs.
The enemy last week may have been using a remote-controlled toy detonated IED. Well, he realized we know how to jam that now, because we just spent millions on outfitting every vehicle on the battlefield with a jammer that knows how to jam those toy cars. So he goes on to something else. So now he's going to go on to washing machine timers or something like that, or garage door openers, or cell phones that are on an entirely different frequency. So you can't just up the power on the old box that you have. You actually have to get a new capability in there, because it's an entirely different inside guts to that box. So that really does add up the cost.
The question is, who's winning this deadly arms race? The billion-dollar IED countermeasures? Or cheap, easy-to-make roadside bombs?
The enemy can implant 1,000 of these. If we even found 90% of them, 100 IEDs going off against our soldiers will create casualties that start to fracture the political will and the morale of our countries to prosecute these conflicts. And so I wouldn't characterize it as a tit for tat. I think the enemy uses a very effective weapon system against us, and the onus is on us to try and work through those.
Yochi Driesen is a Washington-based journalist who's been embedded with coalition troops in Afghanistan more than 20 times.
JATO has been given tens of billions of dollars to spend, more than any new command in the history of the United States military, with one simple mission: save U.S. troops from IEDs. Bring more of them back alive, bring more of them back without the limbs that they're missing now because of these enormous bombs. And by every statistical measure, JATO has failed. Now, the JATO response, and I think there's some truth to it, is, yes, we have not stopped this problem, but absent us, the problem would be a lot worse.
Between 2009 and 2010, IED attacks against coalition troops in Afghanistan more than doubled. Casualties tripled.
The number of IEDs being produced by the Taliban had rocketed, which effectively created a stalemate. There were literally thousands being laid. They were being produced at the rate, the estimation was at the rate of one every 15 minutes.
Sean Raymond was a paratrooper before becoming a journalist. In 2010, he was embedded with troops in Helmand Province, writing a book called Bomb Hunters.
The other huge problem facing the British Army at that time was that they only had 10 bomb disposal teams in Helmand to deal with that threat.
The Taliban seemed to have the upper hand.
You might go out on a patrol, which would be a routine area clearance patrol around your base, where overnight, unbeknown to that particular unit, 3 or 4 devices could have been planted. And there were many occasions where there would have been a multiple incident where someone would have stepped on a bomb, had a leg blown off, or been killed outright, and in the recovery of the injured person or the body, other soldiers would have been killed and injured. And that was happening on a daily basis.
In just 10 months, 108 British soldiers were killed in Helmand Province, 70% of them by IEDs. 5 British bomb disposal officers were among those who died. Another bomb disposal officer was seriously wounded and lost his legs.
They were never scared of defusing bombs. The problem was that there were so many of them. And when I think you're dealing with that number of bombs, you only need to make one mistake and you're going to get an injury, you're going to get a casualty. And that was the problem in Helmand, was that they had people who were dealing with vast numbers of devices, and there were only very few of them.
This is the Taliban's best weapon. This is a weapon for which the U.S., with all of its military might, unlimited amount of money, has not figured out how to stop. But at the same time, there's also an acknowledgement that the Taliban don't have an incentive to stop using these because they work and they're cheap. If you have a weapon that works and is cheap, why would you possibly stop using it?
In response to mounting casualties from IED attacks, the Americans shipped thousands of heavy armored personnel carriers to Afghanistan, called MRAPs, or mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, some weighing 20 tons and costing up to $1 million each. The British bought several hundred and gave them names like Mastiff, Ridgeback and Wolfhound. But the IEDs kept coming. Trooper Dan Young was a Mastiff driver in Afghanistan in 2010.
The thing that got me was when you get there and you take over the Mastiffs and you've got to look for the one that isn't damaged on the Mastiff Park. You take a look at them, what the damage have taken, then the realism of it, of IED threat, it hits you really hard.
Dan was soon out on patrol. 2 weeks into his tour, his sergeant suspected there were IEDs buried in front of their vehicle. Dan was ordered to get out and with a metal detector, look for them on the ground.
I've been looking for about an hour and I thought, this is useless. There's so much desert to look for. I don't know. There's so many different places I can hide them. They can do all sorts. And then my sergeant shouted to me, come on Dan, let's go. We're moving off. And that's when the beep went. And the thing that hits you hard, you think, right, could it be, or could it be a bottle cap? But this one just looks a bit dodgy, because it's like clumps of mud, like dried mud, with grass. And I was just pulling clumps off, like that. And I found a small anti-personnel mine. And the eerie thing is, I wasn't just playing with an anti-personnel mine. There's 2 anti-tank mines underneath it. It takes 85 kilograms of pressure to set off an anti-tank mine. And it takes about not even a pound to set off the anti-personnel mine off. So the idea was you used to step on that and just to set the rest of them off.
Dan was lucky, and later when his Mastiff was hit by an IED, he survived.
There was a great big bang. Then there was the flash, and it lasted a lifetime. The commander jumped on my legs, checking my feet, checking my ankles, patted my stomach, patted everything. Are you all right? Are you all right? And I looked at my gunner and he was just sat on the platform and he was gobsmacked. He was like, what was that? What was that? And he had panic on the radio. It was quite frightening. It was quite disturbing. And then typical army banter, you either laugh or you cry about it, so we all laughed. But then seconds after, you sort of sit there and you think, Christ, it's an IED.
Dan's Mastiff only had its front wheel blown off. The new armoured personnel carriers were proving effective, saving coalition lives across Afghanistan. But there was a problem. The MRAPs were too heavy to handle Afghanistan's rough and especially muddy terrain.
Afghanistan, the fighting is all rural, and the roads there are non-existent. I was embedded once in southern Afghanistan on a 2-day mission. The mission started with 30 MRAPs. By the end of the first day, there were 3 that were operational. The other 27 had broken axles, broken tires. They just literally could not go any further. So now the military is rushing an entirely new vehicle bought at tremendous expense, which is an all-terrain design for the MRAP. These all-terrain vehicles will hopefully have that same level of protection, but also be able to go off-road, which right now they can't.
And here's the new vehicle. It's called the MATV, and 8,700 have been rushed to US forces in Afghanistan. Each one weighs about 11 tons, which is about 2/3 that of the MRAPs that can't handle Afghanistan's terrain. It's on show here, at the world's biggest arms fair, held in London last month.
We're
The MRAPs were so heavy, you had to, there wasn't many roads, and the roads that they did, these MRAPs were collapsing. With the M-ATV being lighter, we're able to negotiate terrain that normally you couldn't do in an armored vehicle.
It's a great solution, but the Taliban have been busy too. If the coalition was going to use massive vehicles, the Taliban would plant bigger bombs.
There was one bomb in particular that was, to the military, the kind of turning point. There was a patrol in the south of Afghanistan again, driving over a riverbed. It was a Striker. A Striker is an armored vehicle, kind of like an MRAP, but with treads as opposed to tires, heavily armored. And it had armor plating on the floor, because again, the threat was an IED coming from below. And this Striker vehicle rolled over a huge IED. Military investigators estimated it at 1,000 pounds. The force of it hurled the metal plate that was for protection straight up through the vehicle and then out the roof, and then hurled this armored vehicle 500 feet. They had never seen anything like it. And the death toll from that one bomb was 7 soldiers. It, again, both the death toll, the size of the bomb, and how it was detonated and its effect had not been seen before in the war.
There is a popular misconception that if you throw enough money at it, enough technology, that you can protect any vehicle from any device, and that's simply not true. This is a small anti-tank mine, about 1.5 kilograms of high explosive. This will disable any main battle tank, but it will completely destroy a small vehicle like a Land Rover or a Humvee. And then you get up to larger devices like these, with 5 or 6 kilograms of high explosive, and it's incredibly difficult to protect any vehicle from something of this size. This is designed to completely destroy a main battle tank weighing 60 tons. If this doesn't do the job, then you just go for a larger charge. You use 2, 3, 4 of those, or you start filling these yellow palm oil containers with homemade explosive, and you use 1/4 of a ton of explosive. You get to a point where there is nothing that can be done to protect a vehicle or its occupants from a charge that size.
It's widely known that the Taliban's homemade explosives are made by mixing fertilizer with easy-to-obtain chemicals. Even though banned in Afghanistan, the fertilizer still seems to be available.
It's liquidy while it's cooking, and it becomes solid once you've poured it into a jug. It's just the same. And this, you see, is a 10-kilogram mine.
It's known that the Taliban can make big IEDs by combining several cooking oil containers full of explosives together, but they are under pressure.
We keep changing our location. Every 2 or 3 days we change our location. These infidels are focused. They've spread their spies, and then they try to detect us.
Big IEDs can be devastating. In January last year, Marine Staff Sergeant Jack Pearce was in an MRAP in Helmand Province. With him were 2 British journalists and 5 Marines when they ran over an IED.
The sound of the blast was just deafening, and the whole cab had filled up with black smoke. My first thought was just to try and get on the radios, but everybody had their jammers on, so with the electronic countermeasures, the radios weren't working at all.
This is what was left of Jack's vehicle.
It actually picked up the truck and threw it 35 feet away from the blast site and turned us 180 degrees. 2 died instantly in the blast, and the 6 of us, the rest of us, we were pretty seriously injured.
One of those who died was a British journalist. Jack suffered 6 broken ribs, a ruptured spleen, a broken knee, back and neck, and today he's paralyzed from the chest down.
They had buried a wire from the IED to a building that was off in the distance, and there was actually the 3 guys were sitting in there with a little trigger, and as soon as my vehicle rolled over this thing, they detonated it from a remote. So we had our electronic countermeasures on, but they didn't work against the wire detonated IEDs. The terrorists that did set that particular IED, they sent special forces after them, and they did kill 2 out of the 3. The 3rd one ended up going back and hiding in Pakistan. But I think they pretty much cleaned them out pretty well after that particular hit.
And that's the coalition's latest strategy: track down and kill the Taliban's IED teams. It's called attacking the network.
My name is Beng West. I'm a combat Marine, if you will, from Vietnam. I go back to Afghanistan about 3 or 4 times a year and in bed with the troops. This year, I've been there 3 times.
Bing West is a 71-year-old retired Marine Corps officer and was an Assistant Secretary of Defense. He videos his fact-finding trips to Afghanistan.
They're right in front of us. We got one wall in front of us, and then an open field, and we're attacking in the northwest. The biggest problem are the IEDs. It's just a vicious, vicious enemy to be fighting. Every patrol I was out with, you'd bump into IEDs. They're so simple. This is one that one of the corporals gave to me because we were walking along, and he was at the point, and he was carrying the mine detector, sweeping back and forth, and it's the same mine detector you use on a beach to find coins. And all of a sudden he stopped, and he knelt down, and he dug underneath the surface, and then, kind of joking, he suddenly flipped this at me and said, "Here you go, sir." This is what kills most of the British and American troops.
This ran to the IED right here.
That's to the power
and
source.
These 2 ran to the power source.
And this is a pretty good pressure plate here because it only takes about, I'm doing probably about 15 pounds with my fingers here.
Yeah.
And it's already touching.
4 AT rounds.
Yaz was terrific. He was the corporal that I was out with, and I really relied on him. He had found 38 of the IEDs. The day after I left, he lost his leg.
Politicians and generals in Washington have come to realize that the Taliban's IEDs have the coalition on the horns of a dilemma.
The dilemma is that even when you put all that money in, you can't stop it completely. You never can.
So the coalition decided that to have any chance of defeating IEDs, it also has to track down and eliminate those who make and plant them. They call this attacking the network.
Attacking the network essentially means, number one, understanding this chain of action. Who is financing? Who is motivating? Who's paying for the emplacers? Who are the emplacers? What's their motivation? Why is the population permitting this? Just saying attack the network implies that we're using lethal means against people. That's only a small part of it.
As part of attacking the network, on campuses across the United States, academics are developing ways to identify Taliban IED units in faraway Afghanistan. Here at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Professor Kathleen Carley does what's called social network analysis for the Pentagon.
You build this picture, like a web almost, showing who the people are and who they're talking to and how frequently they're talking. And then you take that and you say, well, in that network, who's really important? Let me show you what I mean. So here we have this person called Mohammed. Mohammed, we know, is a member of the Taliban. He's a terrorist. And we're saying, well, he's someone we know about. We also know about this guy Khan and this guy Saeed. And so we start following them and watching them around. And as we do that, we say, we know Mohammed has some money. And then we figure out that there's this unknown benefactor who's in fact given him that money. And we know that Mohammed is also attached to this other person. And that makes him a good person to go in and get information from. But also if we were to just remove him, everyone would be disconnected. And, it would be easier to break this group up. It still doesn't tell us who's actually planning the IED. We know that there's someone else there who is rumored to have access to IEDs, who has actually met with Mohammed at a particular cafe on a particular day. But the question is, who is this person? Because we can't just go in and arrest an unknown person. And then we find out later that Saeed was seen on the street outside of that cafe on the day that Mohammed was there, And that suggests that, in fact, because Saeed knows Mohammed and the unknown person knows Mohammed, and Saeed also has been trained in those terror camps, then in fact Saeed is the unknown person, making this very actionable from a military perspective because we've put it into locations.
Actionable intelligence can be used by combat units. Video feeds from American Predator and Reaper unmanned aerial vehicle attacks against suspected Taliban in Afghanistan. Today, these unmanned spy planes armed with rockets dominate the Afghan airspace.
When the Afghan war began, we had only a handful of these systems. Now they're out there daily. The overall number of these technologies, when you talk about unmanned systems as a whole, is from that handful to more than 7,000.
Flown remotely by British and American pilots here in Nevada and coordinated from US Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar in the Persian Gulf, and with a budget of more than $4 billion this year, the size of the systems behind each UAV strike is enormous.
It is communicating via a global network. That information will be seen by that person sitting in Nevada, but it also might be seen by someone sitting in Langley, Virginia, say at the CIA or at another Air Force intelligence base. It'll also be beamed back to those on the ground in Afghanistan. The point is that rather than there being 0 humans involved when you've got a robotic system like the Predator, you actually have a large number. One estimate was that the ratio was roughly 68 people for every 1 system that you have out there.
Increasingly, the UAVs have been tasked to search for and kill Taliban bomb-planting teams.
You now have armed drones in Afghanistan being used specifically for counter-IED missions. So these drones are flying over a road, looking for the person planting the bomb. If they see them, and the OK is given from the nearest command post, they're firing missiles at that person. So their effort has gone from reconnaissance to killing, and the number of people they've killed has skyrocketed.
Over 900 Taliban leaders have been killed over the past year. The main thrust of attacking the network now is capture and kill missions carried out by special forces at night against suspected Taliban IED team members.
The leaders of the Taliban who influence IED operations have to be captured or killed. In my own opinion, there are some people that just will not reconcile with the government, and there's no amount of negotiation that's going to bring them over. And they have decided to attack us, and they have to be a part of the lethal targeting business.
This is a fight between those planting the bombs, those plotting where the bombs go, and then those on the US NATO side trying to find those people and kill them. It's the shadow war of special operations forces coming in at night by helicopter, looking for bomb makers, looking for bomb facilitators. That is the Afghan war. Everything else is a sideshow.
They've used this expression, harvesting the Taliban, because so many have been killed and captured. So they're trying to take out the commanders, the bomb makers, but the devices are still there, and they're going to be there probably whilst there is a war going on in Afghanistan.
For British photographer Giles Dooley, it happened while he was on a routine patrol with a small unit of American and Afghan National Army soldiers this February.
We were very cautious always to avoid any obvious routes. There was a guy with a mine detector always at the front of every patrol. Unfortunately, the terrain there is very difficult. It's very muddy, so it's very easy to cover up an IED and for it not to look recently planted. We set out to a small compound where we'd been ambushed a couple of days before. When we reached the compound, I turned around to have a word with one of the American soldiers. As I turned around, I stepped on the pressure plate. I felt an immediate click. The next thing I knew was a very bright light and a sense of heat that just enveloped me. I was thrown in the ground, thrown about 20 feet, landed pretty hard on my side. In fact, lying where I was, I could see there was a tree above me and I could see various parts of myself in the tree. which obviously pointed to the fact that things weren't that good, especially as I could see my boxer shorts, which was an immediate worry.
Just this past year, the number of IEDs has skyrocketed. The number of IED casualties has skyrocketed even further. To put numbers onto it, this past June, there were 1,600 IED attacks in Afghanistan, the most ever recorded.
The volume of IEDs, those which the enemy emplaces against us, tells us that they still have the materiel and the motivation to attack us.
We've already killed all the dumb terrorists, so all that's left are the smart ones. And these are the guys that are coming up with the new and innovative ways to try and defeat our armor. So it's just going to continue on until we eventually kill them.
They just put a weapon of war, admittedly a very nasty one, but I don't believe in my own mind that just by the use of IEDs will decide whether the campaign is brought to a successful conclusion or not.
You don't win the war against the IED, you win the war against the insurgency. That's the problem set here. So if we say we're not doing well against IEDs, well, part of it is because we're not doing well against the insurgency.
That insurgency has found a cheap, simple way to frustrate the most powerful military and richest society in the world. A new era of warfare has arrived.